Having representation is such an important thing, and it's a huge reason as to why I want to speak out in general. There's so many diverse ways to be trans, to be a person of color in general, that it's hard to know where that begins and ends if you never even see an example of that.
I got you. Over the last year, we have seen an unprecedented amount of anti-transgender legislation introduced across the country, particularly targeting youth. In the interest of centering their voices, we have created a space to hear directly from young trans and non-binary folks about what brings them joy.
My trans joy is creating celebratory representations of members in my community.
What obstacles stand in their way.
Anyone telling your story for you and then telling it wrong, how do you contend with that?
And what we can do to fight for their future.
In every culture, trans kids will keep coming out. Will they be supported or will they be harmed?
I'm Raquel Willis, and this is Logo's first ever Trans Youth Town Hall. When I think about what it's like to be young, I also think about the importance of having possibility models, having inspiration. I didn't really see trans folks on the screen or just in life when I was young, right? But I wonder what it's like for y'all. I mean, who are your inspirations or your possibility models?
I think for me, it's gotta be Sarah McBride. I just love her. I met her, which was super cool. And I think for me, at the time, it was really powerful to see trans people doing really cool work in the government. Because I think when I think about government, I think about these powerful people who aren't like me, who aren't anyone who I know, because they're above it all, I guess.
What about you, Miles?
When I was first figuring it all out, I could not identify any Black trans men. I was like, where are they at? They have to exist. And then Teak Milan, came out with this he's such a fine man. God. But
Can we say that?
Can we just talk about it for a second?
Well, obviously one of them is sitting right in front of me. You know that you were
I was not fishing, I swear.
I know you weren't fishing, but I mean, you know that you were my vision of hope in my Vogue essay. But one moment that I will never forget is the moment that I was sitting in Red Lobster in middle school with my mom, and in the corner, there was the Janet Mock Pierce Morgan interview playing. And I had never felt so seen up until that moment. I saw a woman standing in her truth. I saw a woman owning her space, and also a woman who was not going to back down. I had never seen a trans woman on television, open in life, living her life the way that I had saw that day. Yeah, I will never forget that moment. Janet Mock and Red Lobster.
Yeah, I remember that moment for sure.
Huge inspiration for me is definitely Chella Man. Chella Man is the first trans Asian person I ever saw. And the fact that he's also an artist was insane, because I was like, this is someone who looks like me, who does things that I would want to do. And I actually remember crying the first time I saw that, just because it was so incredible to see that for the first time. Because whenever I'd see trans representation, it was always white trans representation. I would have no idea what a person of color as a trans person would look like.
Chella is cool, I mean, and one of the sweetest people, but also played a superhero. So that's amazing.
He's my hero for sure.
Growing up in Goldsboro, North Carolina, it was pretty rough, especially trying to find myself in that space. Growing up, I can't think of anyone that was really Black or trans that I really knew of or could look up to. And I think as I got older, it became kind of difficult to start transitioning. When you're transitioning from female to male, there's kind of an expectation that you drop all of your femininity and kind of take on this new masculinity. Sometimes it's like a lot of society is deciding your identity for you, and you kind of have to fit yourself into a box to make sure that you don't ruffle any feathers. And I think that just in general, speaking up as trans people for other people who might not get the same opportunities is really important in terms of visibility and really making sure that trans people are heard, especially trans people of color.
So I want to jump into this with you, Jen, because obviously you work in Hollywood. You've seen it from so many different vantage points over the years. Can you talk about where we are with visibility in 2022?
It's changing radically and rapidly in ways that I think are rather unprecedented. GLAAD releases a report each year called Where We Are on TV, and they found that this year the number of recurring and regular trans characters on television across broadcast, cable, and streaming jumped from 29 to 42, which made an all-time high for television. So trans and non-binary people are on TV more than ever before. But even though we've seen an increase in trans representation, we've actually weirdly seen a backlash out in the regular world where, despite possibly because we're in the media so much more, we're actually going backwards in legislation and going upwards in violence. And that's because media representation is only one part of the puzzle. We also need the resources. We need people like Chase and Dominique to also be on the ground and fighting legislation and providing direct resources to those people. It's a collective ecosystem that has to all go together.
And I just want to say one other thing. Representation isn't just in media and in sort of those aspects of public consumption and discourse. Like, we all live in our little worlds, and people need to see themselves represented in those worlds, whether that's as teachers or on school boards or as lawyers or in the nonprofit they walk into. Like, I remember being a lawyer for trans people, and they had never seen a trans lawyer, and they all of a sudden felt so much safer. And that type of representation is also so significant, because what impacts our life is, of course, what we see in the big sense, but it's also what we see in the small sense.
And media does the same thing. If you're a young trans person and you think, well, is anyone ever gonna love me? And you don't know that many trans people in your life and you don't have that model, you're gonna look for it in TV and films and web series.
And I've heard young people say over and over again, we wanna see ourselves. We want to see ourselves and see the potential of ourselves, because in the media, we get to make a young person who is queer a superhero or come from another planet or have superpowers. I want to see my people do, ridiculous, dope things, because they do ridiculous, dope things every day, and we should see that on the screen.
Watching what my kid gets to watch, like, I was watching this show on Netflix called Kipo and the Wonder Beast, and it's amazing, and it's like so fantastical, and all the characters have this element of queerness. And as much as I'm like, we need a lot more, I do sometimes sit and watch my 9.5-year-old and think, and it is better now. And it's gonna be better in a year. And it's because of all of you, and it's because of all the people who are living and pushing and showing those possibilities. And as someone raising a child, I am so grateful for that.
There are people who know about pronouns because of T.S. Madison on Facebook. So there's also this space of outside of like professionalized spaces, and especially for Black and brown folks, we're not going to get the same level of like reach. But the thing I love about social media or a TikTok moment is that they become a resource, they become a voice, they become verified as a truth teller, and they're in control of it. And a lot of young folks, especially young Black folks, have taken to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and they've done that. So let us make sure we're amplifying those people too.
By a show of hands, who has seen a representation of themselves in media? Like, has there been a moment where you saw like, oh, yes.
Kind of.
Okay.
More now.
Very minimal.
Yeah.
More now. Tell me more.
I feel like when I transitioned, there weren't that many books, there weren't that many TV shows that like highlighted a trans person in a positive way. But like, I think now with more out trans people and with more vocal trans people, I think it's becoming more of a thing.
One of my therapists gave me a book. It was called Some Assembly Required by Erin Andrews, and I had really never seen any representation of a trans person in media ever. And then I read this book, and I am terrible at reading books. I put it down after like 2 pages. But I actually read this book, and I related a lot to it.
The first time I ever saw a trans person in TV was on Degrassi. The character Adam Torres that was like a groundbreaking moment in my life. And from there, I've been looking for trans representation that is like trans masc and Black. Still struggling. I don't think we're quite there yet.
A lot of the times, I might see one part of my identity represented, but not necessarily all of it. It doesn't need to be exactly catered to me or my specific experience. But I think that there's a lot more trans people of color who are neurodivergent, people with all these different experiences and abilities that need to be represented in media.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's all on us to kind of hold the banner of like more stories, just more, right? Hopefully good ones, but hopefully with those numbers, we'll get those good ones that come out. You know, I want to thank y'all for sharing so much knowledge and brilliance and love and joy with all of our viewers. And I want to ask you one last thing. Let's share a message to young trans and non-binary folks.
I would tell them that their uniqueness and their authenticity is a gift to themselves, to all the people in their life, and to the world, and to never forget it.
I would say see yourself as a book. You're the author of the book, and there may be chapters where you're like, I would love to skip over this, but you've got to go through that chapter. And as long as you're still living life, you're going to be writing chapters, and no one else gets to decide what the ending of the book is going to be except you.
I think I would just say, you know, we got your back.
Well, I definitely got y'all backs. I know y'all got the community back, so I want to thank y'all for being here. These are people who fight day in and day out for trans liberation. And to be in a space to just kind of share and uplift and elevate the voices of trans and non-binary youth is just so powerful. We've just heard from a number of brave, confident young trans people. But remember, there are so many more that are fighting day in and day out to live their truths. We can't claim to be protecting them without listening to those most impacted by our decisions. Even if you don't have a young trans person in your life, you should reflect on how you're going to instill the values of empathy, authenticity, and self-determination within the generations to come. It's about how we all can make joy a part of our lives.
My trans joy is my art.
When people know us as who we are and not what we are.
Trans joy for me is all about the love and care that flows between friends, family, community, and me.
Definitely doing things I love with the people I love, and everything is just happy.
Flowers coming out of my heart, fireworks, rocket ships, just blooming, thriving, everything like that.
Trans joy is about unbridled expression and creativity.
Getting up, wearing something that feels gender affirming, and being like, I look good as myself.
Trans joy is about having conversations where we can all learn just a bit more about the wide range of human experiences.
This right here, I mean,
That's what I was gonna say.
This is what trans joy is, yeah.
It's about putting together our disparate puzzle pieces to build a pathway to liberation.